Reading the Room is the result of groundbreaking empirical research by David Cantor, an American systems psychologist, organizational consultant, and clinical researcher. It reveals the fundamental structure to all communication known as structural dynamics, which provides the solution to the most common communication challenges. This training is designed to enhance your communication skills, whether with colleagues in the office or at home with friends and family, with special emphasis on developing your teleconference skills. It has been developed in collaboration with Dialogics, who are global experts in the field of communication and behavioral change. This video is a new way of learning. The basic structure is learn, rest, learn, rest, learn. The repetition tells the brain what information is important and worth retaining in the long-term memory, and the rests allow the brain to start the chemical process to encode information. The information and my voiceover will be presented to you very quickly. It may feel overwhelming at first. Relax and stay focused. Your brain will be taking in more information than you realize. The first learning input will last about 10 minutes, after which there will be a break. You will learn a model of communication called structural dynamics. Models are important because from an early age we intuitively model the world. We construct an image of what the world looks like and how it works. Every model will differ. Our model brings clarity in that we would be unable to make any sense of the world without some sort of model, and distortion in that every model selects for what we think is important and reduces complexity. Conversations succeed or fail based on the interaction of different personal models. Successful cross-model conversations occur if both parties explore their differences, which means difference is a key source of learning about ourselves, our models, and the world at large. And every model has its limits. The only bad model is one that does not recognize its own limits, wrongly assumes it is complete, and presumes itself better than other models. What follows will help you understand different models of the world so that you are better able to communicate and facilitate cross-model conversations. Structural dynamics regards speech as an act, focusing on the intention behind the words that people use. Each and every speech act can be categorized as either a move, follow, oppose, or bystand. A move initiates action with an idea or proposed direction. A follow supports an action. An oppose challenges an idea to make sure it's worthy, and at other times because of genuine disagreement. A bystand is an observation, adding a neutral perspective and presenting new frames of reference, insight, and observation. For structural understanding, we don't need to consider the actual content of what was said. For example, it doesn't matter whether my move is about, say, business strategy or ordering lunch. Communication is effective when colleagues move fluidly between action stances, making full use of the interaction space. When speakers become stuck in one or more positions, the conversational space is constricted. Roles are complementary and all combinations are needed. And yet, because structural differences are also a source of confusion and conflict, colleagues can unknowingly surround themselves with others who have their same limited repertoire. You can improve your interactions by expanding the range of stances you take in conversation, which will also open the space for others to play a wider range of complementary roles. Every move, follow, oppose, or bystand takes place within one of three language domains: affect, meaning, and power. One might think of the language as an orientation or world that preoccupies the communicator. Some focus heavily on feelings, affect, others on getting things done, power, and others on what it all means, meaning, and it is connected to a deep inner sense of what matters. Most colleagues can speak all three languages with varying levels of comfort. Each domain has strengths and weaknesses, and each is indispensable to successful verbal interaction because when one is overly dominant, it can have as much detrimental impact as when entirely absent, whether in organizations, leadership, parenting, or love. During heated conversation, our dominant domain makes us more likely to hear certain kinds of information and filter out other kinds, and so talk becomes confused. In business, affect is still the least commonly heard of the languages. Primarily confined to social pre- and post-meeting activity, an affect revolution in business has been accelerating over the last 30 years. Colleagues strong in affect value relationships. Affect is the language of intimacy, connection, feelings, emotion, and caring. You will hear words like empathize, sensitive, well-being, feel, care, love, and hate. Power tends to be the dominant language in corporate life. Metaphorically, the power domain represents the muscle and sinew of an organization. Think of effectiveness, efficacy, competence, potency, skill, and productivity, signaled by words such as action, achieve, move forward, accountable, outcomes, and performance. The meaning domain is the territory of ideas, purpose, high value, and access to information. You'll hear words such as ideas, purpose, integration, logic, understanding, theory, values, and patterns in conversations about strategy, values, and solving problems. Groups develop rules that govern behavior, boundaries, relationships, and speech. There are three types of operating systems: open, closed, and random. None is inherently better or worse, each has value and limitations. You will have a preference. The open operating system values contributions from many people and often seeks a collective decision arrived at by consensus, seeking to develop shared responsibility, purpose, and leadership. Its negative aspect is a tyranny of process, where a desire to achieve consensus prevents a decision being made. A colleague preferring closed systems may show impatience in an open system, ask for closure, demean members who follow open system preference, become confrontational, or shut down entirely. Colleagues with a tendency for random systems may disrupt conversation or sustain the right to talk in order to find creative solutions. The closed system is the preference of many organizations and is characterized by clearly defined roles, strong formal leaders, and an emphasis on tradition, planning, and are stable and highly structured. A closed system achieves results through repetitive and efficient processing. However, over the long term, it may break down, become mindlessly robotic, less receptive to new information, innovation, and change. The open system colleague typically insists on being heard and may challenge authority and group norms to do so. Random system colleagues not only challenge the authority of closed system leaders, but often will attempt to undermine it. Creative colleagues who make rather than follow rules flourish in random systems such as startups, with fluid processes that emphasize individual creativity so much that it is often viewed by outsiders as chaotic or out of control. But instead of lacking order, the random system represents a special kind of order of infinite possibilities. Well-functioning random systems rely on intuition, the same mechanism used to create and innovate, to know when to manage down or end discourse. At its worst, no one has a clear sense of direction. People become confused and disoriented, experiencing the tyranny of chaos, and closed and open types trying to express themselves in this system may feel unheard, uncreative, and undervalued, and may be driven out or shut down entirely. There is some overlap of features among systems, and having a preference does not mean you will operate in the system in all circumstances. A skillful member of a group will be able to temper and complement one system with another. For example, a leader who leans towards open systems may decide to take a more closed approach at times. To start developing your skills, find a project or team meeting where you are not responsible for the agenda. Reading the room is a form of bystanding. Learn to step back mentally and nurture the ability to step back to a neutral place where you can view the whole, leaving yourself behind as a part of the system. Also nurture the ability to glide back in and engage as a participant. The easiest way to do this is to visualize what is occurring structurally in the room. Divide your notepaper into 4 and mark the quadrants move, follow, bystand, oppose. As your colleagues speak, identify and plot what action stances they are taking, whether a move, an oppose, a follow, or bystand. A high-functioning group typically includes all 4 action stances. Structural patterns that produce favorable outcomes are an important part of successful team process. If any one of the 4 stances are missing, communication will be impaired. Patterns tend to repeat and embed themselves within systems as part of the group's culture. So patterns can also be destructive. Colleagues become so convinced that a structural pattern will play out, they anticipate and respond to it in advance. The players become stuck in their roles. They respond to one another in line with their past interactions rather than the current one. In these sequences, the structural pattern has begun to shape the content and can perpetuate an unproductive outcome. The most common patterns are move, oppose. When we are brought into conflict situations in families and teams or between partners, there is often a point-counterpoint structure at work. In contrast, courteous compliance is common in traditional cultures or in teams just beginning to form. The conversation is polite with very little controversy or pushback. When courteous compliance predominates, it lessens the often needed correction that group input provides. Similarly, courteous compliance can reflect a mindset that any idea from George must be good, or that the action of following takes precedence over careful consideration of content. Group members turn on autopilot, silencing their own abilities to move or oppose, and allowing George to be their sole initiator. And finally, covert opposition is where someone makes a move, and publicly everyone else either follows or bystands, but underneath they harbour sceptical or oppositional thoughts. Instead of openly confronting the moves being made, they sabotage. Meanwhile, the mover believes that the silence or acquiescence of the team signals support. Due to the constraints of teleconference equipment, you are often muted by the one-way audio technology of a conference phone and will have limited opportunity to speak. To help you make the most impact when you get the opportunity to speak, you can make notes according to follow, oppose, move, and bystand. When you get to speak, identify the stance that is most missing from the conversation in the room at the other end of the line, or that breaks a pattern that has emerged, and interject with the most important item on your notes from that stance. This will ensure that you create the most impact. You may wish to limit yourself to 3 points, otherwise you may dilute your impact. You can always follow up with any additional points after the meeting. Once you become proficient, start to observe the domain each actor speaks from. Power, affect, or meaning. You can start to add colour to the actors in your mental map, red for power, blue for affect, green for meaning, and then observe the operating system by adding a shape to the room that you are mapping: round for open, square for closed, triangular for random. If you observe a dominant operating system and a colleague operating from a different system, you can put them in their own room within the larger. When you have enough distance, diffusing disruptive patterns is relatively easy. Use your knowledge to look for a pattern of action stances that are keeping them stuck. That brings us to the end of the first learning input. You have been presented with a lot of new information and may be feeling overwhelmed. This is perfectly normal and is a natural part of learning. What follows is a 10-minute distraction activity. The distraction is a critical part of the process. This will be followed by a quiz on what has just been presented, followed by another 10-minute distraction activity. Finally, we will present you with case studies to show you how to apply these models in a number of real-life situations. As part of the learning process, you will now be presented with a series of questions. Try to answer as fully as you can in response to the question. A textbook answer will then be provided to reinforce what you know and to remind you of what you aren't able to recall. Let's go. Structural dynamics models the way in which we communicate. Why is this important? Models are important because from an early age we intuitively model the world. We construct an image of what the world looks like and how it works. Every model will differ. Conversations succeed or fail based on the interaction of different personal models. How would you describe a speech act? Structural dynamics regards speech as an act, focusing on the intention behind the words that people use. Each and every speech act can be categorized as either a move, follow, oppose, or bystand. True or false? Strictly speaking, dialogue involves only two parties. False. The roots of the word dialogue come from the Greek words dia and logos. Dia means through and logos translates to word or meaning. So dialogue is characterized by a flow of meaning which can take place with any number of parties. It is even possible to be in dialogue with oneself. What is a cross-model conversation? Is it A. A conversation in which there is an inherent conflict between the various models the people in the conversation are unconsciously holding which causes polarization? B. An inquiry-based attempt at mutually uncovering assumptions behind and developing understandings regarding different models employed in any given conversation? Or C. A conversation in which the two parties are employing different structural dynamics models or levels, such as where one party is focusing on speech acts, whilst another party is focusing on operating systems. An inquiry-based attempt at mutually uncovering assumptions behind and developing understandings regarding different models employed in any given conversation. Describe a move. A move initiates action with an idea or proposed direction. True or false? A follow validates and completes an action. True. A follow supports an action. Offering correction is a feature of which speech act? A. Oppose, B. Follow, C. Move, or D. Bystand. Oppose. An oppose challenges an idea to make sure it's worthy, and at other times because of genuine disagreement. True or false? In certain contexts, bystanding sometimes involves not taking part. False. In structural dynamics, a bystand is an observation which is verbalized, adding a neutral perspective and presenting new frames of reference, insight, and observation. Impatience can be an unintended consequence of which speech act? A. Oppose, B. Follow, C. Move, or D. Bystand. C. Move. The intention behind a move is to create direction, commitment, and clarity. Overuse can sometimes come across as pushiness or an impatience to drive forward in a particular direction. What is the easiest way to learn to observe the action stances as they occur during a meeting? The easiest way to do this is to visualize what is occurring structurally in the room. Divide your notepaper into 4 and mark the quadrants move, follow, bystand, oppose. As your colleagues speak, identify and plot what action stances they are taking. True or false? A group without an enabled bystand function is likely to be at risk. True. Roles are complementary and all combinations are needed. If any one of the 4 stances are missing, communication will be impaired. A group that doesn't have an active bystand within it is at risk of operating without perspective. In the following conversation, what action stances are being taken by each actor? Move, follow, oppose, or bystand?
When we finish the meeting, I reckon we'll be hungry, so let's get something from the cafe downstairs.
We always eat in the cafe. I don't want to go there again.
We tend to have quite different preferences in terms of food. How about the restaurant on the corner?
That sounds perfect.
When we finish the meeting, I reckon we'll be hungry, so let's get something from the cafe downstairs.
We always eat in the cafe. I don't want to go there again.
We tend to have quite different preferences in terms of food. How about the restaurant on the corner?
That sounds perfect.
What is the difference in the quality of communication between those conversations where all action stances are used and those conversations where the action stances become stuck in a pattern? Communication is effective when colleagues move fluidly between action stances, making full use of the interaction space. When speakers become stuck in one or more positions, the conversational space is constricted. You can improve your interactions by expanding the range of stances you take in conversation, which will also open the space for others to play a wider range of complementary roles. Which of the following represents a serial monologue? A sequence of bystands. B, a sequence of move-oppose. C, a sequence of moves. Or D, a sequence of moves and bystands. C, a sequence of moves. Serial monologue is characterized by move after move after move being made in the conversational space. This often gathers pace and without any balance from the other action stances, it becomes difficult to keep up with the numerous varying directions, none of which receive follow to bring to completion. Serial monologue can be an appropriate pattern for a brainstorming session, but is often dysfunctional if it is the way a team most frequently tend to communicate when together. What are the 3 most common patterns of action stances that have a negative effect on outcomes? Move, oppose. When we are brought into conflict situations in families and teams or between partners, there is often a point-counterpoint structure at work. In contrast, courteous compliance is common in traditional cultures or in teams just beginning to form. The conversation is polite with very little controversy or pushback. And finally, covert opposition is where someone makes a move and publicly everyone else either follows or bystands, but underneath they harbour sceptical or oppositional thoughts. Which 2 speech acts do you think are absent during courteous compliance? A, bystand and oppose. B, oppose and move. C, move and bystand. A, bystand and oppose. The conversation is polite with very little controversy or pushback. When courteous compliance predominates, it lessens the often needed correction that group input provides. Group members turn on autopilot, silencing their own abilities to move or oppose, and fail to name what is happening through an active bystand. Can you recall the 3 language domains? Affect, which focuses heavily on feelings. Power, which is about getting things done. And meaning is the language we use when considering what it all means. During an argument, we default to our dominant language domain. What does this do to what we are able to hear? During heated conversation, our dominant domain makes us more likely to hear certain kinds of information and filter out other kinds, and so talk becomes confused. The communication domain of power most strongly involves which characteristic? A, action, B, strength, or C, control? A, action. Power tends to be the dominant language in corporate life. Metaphorically, the power domain represents the muscle and sinew of an organisation. Think of effectiveness, efficacy, competence, potency, skill, and productivity, signalled by words such as action, achieve, move forward, accountable, outcomes, and performance. In which communication domain are you likely to encounter psychobabble? A, power, B, affect, or C, meaning? B, affect. Affect is the language of connection and relationship. It focuses on feelings and has a crucial role to play in the conversational space. Overused, it can become overly focused on emotion and feelings to the detriment of being able to apply logic and proves a barrier to achieving necessary tasks. True or false? In general, affect has more impact on people than meaning. False. No communication domain is any better than another. In general, having the skill to notice which communication domain might be best placed in a particular environment and the ability to flex your communication domain to meet that requirement are the key to effective communication. You ask Rebecca why she is reading about reading the room. For each of the following answers, identify which language domain she is speaking in.
I'm reading it because I want to deepen my interactions with the people I care about. I'm reading it because these skills will help me get what I want, a promotion. I'm reading it because I want to increase my knowledge and understanding of this model. I'm reading it because I want to deepen my interactions with the people I care about. I'm reading it because these skills will help me get what I want, a promotion. I'm reading it because I want to increase my knowledge and understanding of this model.
Can you name the 3 operating systems? There are 3 types of operating systems: open, closed, and random. None is inherently better or worse, each has value and limitations. You will have a preference. What is the purpose of these operating systems? Groups develop rules to govern behaviour, boundaries, relationships, and speech. These rules are often implicit, but we know that they exist from the behaviours that we see around us. How would you describe the open operating system? The open operating system values contributions from many people and often seeks a collective decision arrived at by consensus, seeking to develop shared responsibility, purpose, and leadership. Describe the negative aspect of the open operating system. Its negative aspect is a tyranny of process, where a desire to achieve consensus prevents a decision being made. The functional characteristic of leadership managing for the good of the whole is enabled by which operating system? A. Random, B. Closed, or C. Open? B. Closed. Closed systems are often hierarchical, and a feature is that the leadership tend to control decision-making and do so on behalf of the rest of the organisation. Leadership is placed at the top, and there are often formal structures in place that support this. How would you describe the closed operating system? The closed system is the preference of many organisations and is characterised by clearly defined roles, strong formal leaders, and an emphasis on tradition, planning, and are stable and highly structured. What, in your opinion, are the positive and negative aspects of the closed operating system? A closed system achieves results through repetitive and efficient processing. However, over the long term, it may break down, become mindlessly robotic, less receptive to new information, innovation, and change. What sort of person would you expect to enjoy working in a random system, and what does a random operating system offer them? Creative colleagues who make rather than follow rules flourish in random systems such as startups, with fluid processes that emphasize individual creativity so much that it is often viewed by outsiders as chaotic or out of control. But instead of lacking order, the random system represents a special kind of order of infinite possibilities. What's the worst thing about random operating systems? At its worst, no one has a clear sense of direction. People become confused and disoriented, experiencing the tyranny of chaos, and closed and open types trying to express themselves in this system may feel unheard, uncreative, and undervalued, and may be driven out or shut down entirely. Rebecca has been asked to deal with a problem. Identify the operating system in each of the following 3 replies.
I'll prepare an agenda for our meeting to make sure we cover all the issues we need to in the time available. I want to hear what other people think. It's important that everyone has their say before we reach any conclusions. I feel calling a meeting will be too stifling. Why don't we set aside some time and explore possibilities in whatever way people want to? I'll prepare an agenda for our meeting to make sure we cover all the issues we need to in the time available. I want to hear what other people think. It's important that everyone has their say before we reach any conclusions. I feel calling a meeting will be too stifling. Why don't we set aside some time and explore possibilities in whatever way people want to?
What language domain and operating system does the following describe? Values of inclusion such as democracy and community focus on the process to reap rewards and a strong desire for things to be coherent. A. Open power. B. Open affect, or C. Open meaning. C. Open meaning. This combination of open system and the communication domain of meaning is characterized by trying to understand fit and purpose through soliciting a wide range of individual views. True or false? An oppose in closed power is useful for policing the process to make sure the group doesn't get too far off track. True. Closed power values structure and achieving the task at hand, so someone who is able to oppose a process which does not attend to those features will often refocus a divergent conversation. Now take a moment to think about how the application of structural dynamics might enable you to make a greater impact on the productivity of the teams you work with and projects you work on over the next year. Try to think of 3 benefits. To start developing your skills, think about the meetings you have taking place in the next 4 weeks. Are there any in which it would be inappropriate to practice these techniques? When learning any new skill, you should avoid practicing in a high-stakes situation. New skills are uncomfortable and awkward. If you try them out in high-stakes situations, then you're likely to be unsuccessful. Practice one skill at a time. Start with following the action moves, move, oppose, follow, bystand, during meetings, and then build up your capability. And practice the skill at least 3 times, preferably more, before judging whether it is effective. That brings us to the end of the second learning input. What follows is another 10-minute distraction activity. At the end of the distraction activity will be a series of case studies to show the practical application of this information in real-life situations. In the final part of this module, we'll look at how the theory translates into practice. We're going to join Simon. He loves his work and the company, but as with all jobs, there are frustrations. One of those is the effectiveness of conference calls. His relationship with his US colleagues is great, but when he calls in, the teleconference technology effectively silences him, making it difficult to contribute. He recently completed an e-learning package on structural dynamics, learning techniques that allow him to read the room. He decides to try these techniques out to see what happens. Before the meeting, he divides his notepaper into 4 quarters, marking them move, follow, bystand, oppose. He then spends time reflecting on his thoughts, feelings, and what he most wants to have happen in the meeting. He also considers the things that the US team most need to know from an EMEA perspective. Anything that emerges as a direction or initiates something new, he writes down under move. He knows that the meeting is about a new HR system, so he writes down new HR system in the move section. Challenges, clarifications, and corrections are noted under the oppose section. This could be pushing back on an idea or providing an alternative to something which has already been stated. Where he notices that he supports something which has been stated or is already known, he notes that down under follow. Finally, he thinks about any observations he has, anything which is morally neutral but could be for the benefit of the group. This could be by providing a particular perspective or bridging a number of seemingly disparate ideas, reactions, or tasks. He notes these in the bystand section. He looks at what he has written and prioritises. He recognises that priorities may change as the meeting progresses. He dials into the meeting. The call is answered by Casey, who is leading the project and called the meeting. After the usual introductions, Casey opens up the topic.
So the reason that I called this meeting is that we really need to collaborate on the new worldwide HR system design and implementation. And so I've been asked to get a plan together that we all buy into. The senior leadership team are presenting to the board here, and I want to be able to get sign-off. So I work backwards to hit that deadline, which would mean it would need to be ready a week earlier than planned.
This is Casey making a move. She is opening up the meeting by suggesting a direction that should be taken. Hank speaks.
Casey, I agree, and I think we can probably have it ready within a week.
This is Hank following Casey's move. Simon realises that Casey has a printed document. She's actually pinned up the workflow and screen designs around the meeting room. Obviously, Simon can't see a thing. He tries to interrupt to ask if someone can email the documents through to him so that he can see what they are looking at, but the one-way audio prevents them from hearing him. Simon is effectively silenced and blind to the visual information in the meeting room at the other end of the telephone line. Rather than get frustrated, Simon starts to observe the action stances being taken by his colleagues, because he knows that if all 4 action stances are used, it's more likely to lead to effective decision-making. Crystal speaks.
I don't agree that this is possible in the time frame. The system requirements alone will take me longer than a week to scope out.
This is Crystal opposing Casey's move and Hank's follow. Casey.
I've allowed extra time across our work schedules for this to happen. We can cut some of the planning stages to make this possible.
This is Casey reasserting her move. Crystal.
I need a week to scope out the needs of the Americas. I'll need another week at least for the rest of the regions to respond. So at least 2 weeks, but probably 3, as I'm dependent on each region to respond promptly, which rarely happens.
Crystal restates her oppose to Casey's move. Simon has already been speaking to each of the regions, and so has all the information Crystal requires. He also notices that Casey and Crystal are stuck in a move-oppose pattern. If we were able to share this information with the meeting in the moment, it would be likely to open up the meeting to explore other possibilities. This isn't possible right now because of the technology. He writes this down ready for the moment when the technology will allow him to speak. The meeting continues with Simon both listening to content and observing the action stances taken by those on the other end of the phone line and making notes. Simon notices that there is continued opposition to the move that Casey is making. The meeting comes towards a conclusion without a final decision being made. Casey checks in with Simon.
Okay, so Simon, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Simon looks at his page of notes. He observes that all 4 action stances have not been present. Amongst a fairly strong move-oppose pattern, there has been very little bystand and follow. He chooses to offer a bystand, summarising what he has observed.
I understand the pressure to deliver. What I'm hearing is that Crystal will have to prioritise this project over work that's less urgent but more important. Bill and Tammy are going to have to reschedule their team strategy meeting, and Hank has already indicated that he'll have to delegate.
Simon makes a bystand. The bystand slows down the interaction, and there is a pause whilst the team consider what Simon has said. Simon then offers a move.
I think we need to discuss this now, otherwise we might hit problems later on. Does anyone else agree?
Simon solicits a follow from the team. The team discuss what Simon has said, and it emerges that they agree. Hank.
I think this is achievable if we delegate the project to a team member, in particular one who would appreciate the development opportunity.
Hank makes a move. Tammy.
That's a great idea. I have someone in mind.
Tammy follows. Simon.
I'm conscious that Crystal raised an important point about timescales that we still haven't attended to. I wanted to let you know that I've already got the information from the regions, which means it's possible to follow Casey's original suggestion.
Simon bystands and then follows Casey's original move. The meeting closes. Simon feels that he has contributed. He has helped the team by listening to them and understanding what was missing from the conversation. That enabled him to make a significant impact in the meeting. He changed the conversation, breaking a move-oppose pattern, which resulted in a productive outcome. Simon is also leading another project that has hit a few blockers, issues that are preventing the project moving forward and puts the deadline at risk. He has developed software that may have been patented by another tech company. Simon wants to discuss how his software compares with existing patents. Simon initiates a cross-functional meeting from Europe at a time that is not too late for him, but early enough for his US colleagues to be at work. He starts the call.
Hi everyone. Thanks for making yourselves available. The reason for the call is to discuss a potential patent infringement issue.
He then discovers 70% of the attendees are driving in or on the shuttle bus and unable to watch the WebEx with the slides our hero is using to drive the meeting. Simon inquires of the group how they would like to proceed in open power. He notices that people respond in 3 different ways.
Simon, I'm on a shuttle bus. I can't see the documents. Just give me a brief outline and we can crack on and make a decision.
Simon realizes that the voice is making a move, speaking in closed power. Power because he wants to make a decision, closed because they're directing how things need to be done. Simon listens carefully to the next voice.
I'm feeling uncomfortable that we won't all get a chance to see the document, which would allow us to help you make a decision. It doesn't seem fair to leave you holding this on your own.
Simon hears an oppose in open affect. Open because the voice wants to avoid Simon making the decision on his own, and affect because they are feeling uncomfortable. Simon tunes into the last voice.
I don't think we can make sense of this or be creative enough to find a solution without being able to see the slides.
Simon identifies an oppose in random meaning. Random because the individual wants to bring their creative thinking to bear, and meaning because they want to make sense of the situation. Simon faces a dilemma as he has read the responses structurally and can see the very different operating systems and communication domain preferences. He offers a bystand in meaning about what he is noticing.
I'm wrestling with a dilemma, in that I can hear how there are very different preferences in how we go about attending to this important decision. I can hear some of you are okay with going ahead right now, but there are others who wouldn't be so comfortable. Even though this is less than perfect, please could I ask those of you who feel less able to contribute whether there is anything that we could practically do which would mean that you could engage to the best of your ability despite the restrictions.
I appreciate you asking the question. I just want to make sure you don't feel like you've been left on your own with this. I will, of course, try to contribute as best I can, and if we can all work together to help each other out with that, I imagine that it might be possible.
What would help my thinking is understanding the detail of what's going to be discussed as much as is possible, so that I can think creatively despite not being able to see everything. It would be particularly helpful to understand how we might be infringing the patent, because I would like to be in a conversation which explores any possible alternatives.
Simon responds by trying to speak to the communication domain and system preferences of each of his colleagues. He starts in closed power, naming how long the meeting will take place for, says that he will spend 15 minutes outlining the detail, meeting the needs of his closed power colleague, and then enter into an open conversation with a particular focus on the reasons for this to be blocked and whether there are any other alternatives available, where he seeks to meet the needs of both his open affect colleague and his random meaning colleague. Because each voice is being heard, Simon gets the most out of the meeting, and his colleagues leave the call feeling valued and that they have contributed. Whilst the circumstances were not ideal, he reflects that they rarely are. As he sits back to reflect on how the phone call went, he hears a call across the office.
Simon, can you come and help us? We're stuck and need your help.
Coming!
Simon replies. Before he gets up from his desk, he divides a piece of paper into 4 squares and marks them move, follow, oppose, and bystand. That brings us to the end of this download learning module. You are now processing the information presented to you. Over the coming days, your recall of what has been presented will improve. The information will be retained for far longer than would be the case under conventional methods. And the information will be retained and recalled in practical, actionable form.